Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We got a WASDE report out here today on the 12th of July. We're about an hour after the report has come out, and here to discuss it is Jon Driedger with Leftfield Commodity Research. Hey, John, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you, Sean?
Better than some of the futures markets. Right now, it's a lot of red on the screen, except for all of a sudden the new darling canola. We're going to get to canola here in a second and how we need to be viewing that particular market. But what did we hear today in the WASDE report that has created the concern from traders? Now, some of these could be people, and some of them could be just a whole bunch of electronic trade that happens. We have to be cautious of that. But the market has reacted nonetheless, and we're looking down 25 3/4 in August soybeans, and D's corn is down 12 1/2 as we speak. So what do we make of it? What did the report say?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Sean, I mean, we're kind of an hour after the fact, and so from our perspective, it's always we always put a little more weight on maybe where we close and even where we trade over the next day or two. Often these initial knee-jerk reactions aren't necessarily indicative of what is the quote unquote right number, say, based on the report. But nonetheless, I think probably from the market's reaction and just sort of glancing at expectations, I would say that new crop soybean carryout is one that will be viewed as a little disappointing. Just sort of skimming through the numbers here, as mentioned, the report hadn't come out that long ago, but we got new crop carryout for soybeans here, about 300 million bushels. I think the trade was looking at something closer to 200 million. Yield for soybeans was left unchanged. So obviously we incorporated that new low acreage number, but also reduce demand here in the process. And so the net result is at least at this stage of the game, a bigger new crop carryout for soybeans than maybe had been anticipated. And so, again, I guess all else equal coming in, it's a bit of a disappointment, and maybe for a market that, already was kind of churning around not far off the recent highs, but maybe looking for an excuse or needing an excuse to break out to the upside, certainly didn't get it here. And now we're falling apart post-report. Again, initial reaction, but nonetheless, I think that's where the heaviness is coming from, specifically for soybeans, and I think that's spilling over into everything else a little bit as well.
Yeah, no. Did we see any adjustment to the corn yield?
Yeah, they did bring the corn yield down to 177.5. I mean, I think everyone knew the 181.5 that they were using before was unrealistic, based on weather conditions till now, and so that was brought down to 177.5, and I think that seems, let's call it reasonable, I suppose, at this stage of the game. I mean, who knows? We still have weather ahead and all those sorts of things. Of course, everybody's sort of handicapping what the number should be, but I think that's a defensible number at this stage of the game. So that was factored in. U.S. corn carryout didn't change a whole lot. Of course, we had higher acres, so in many ways that lower yield offset the bigger acres, and so not a whole lot of change in that regard in terms of the carryout for corn as we look ahead for new crop.
Yeah, so if you're somebody that thinks, hey, they're still too high on that number, I'm not suggesting, this isn't some sort of trading show, but maybe an opportunity to go long corn if you think they're a little bit not bearish enough on that yield number. There's a lot of dryness in different pockets, and the trouble is it's like a weather lottery, right? I was talking to a farmer from Iowa yesterday, and he was talking about how it is spotty depending on where you are. It's over a large geography, the dryness, but inside that geography, there's a lot of good and bad.
Oh, no question, Sean. And I mean, we're seeing that up here in Western Canada as well. And it really creates a challenge when we try and get a sense of what the size of that crop is. And here, whether we're talking about corn yields or soybean yields sort of immediately after the USDA report, whether we think about what's happening here in Western Canada, certainly there's a lot of bad on a widespread area. But within that, as you mentioned, it's so spotty. Just over and over again, you hear reports of someone, maybe got 2 inches on their farm and a neighbor just down the road got almost 0, and that's all over the place. And so, how do you sort of sift through that? You always hear more about the bad. The good tends to be a little more quiet. Really difficult to get a sense of that. So kind of, speaking to your comment here about, say, corn yield, is that low enough? That's a really good question. It is so spotty, and that's a real challenge. So, with the corn futures, we're trading to some new lows. Momentum could keep pushing us a little lower, but you wonder if the pendulum is maybe swinging a little bit too far to the downside from a market perspective. On a risk reward basis, the lower we go, certainly they're pricing in maybe a bigger yield than is adequate. And the other part then is also the demand side. Heaven knows, if you go to lower prices, you're probably going to maybe coax in a little bit of demand. Demand has been a bit of a concern of ours. If the price of corn gets cheaper, certainly that doesn't hurt on the usage side as well. So, as these things all are, it's always relative to price, in terms of what's bullish or bearish per se.
Yeah, and corn being below 490 in December is going to be uncomfortable for some people, especially if you feel like you're a little bit light on the how much you've priced so far on the 23 new crop. But if you look at kind of the chart here in the last 3 months, it appears like we're kind of we're kind of running here around $5 and not really that clear on which direction we should head, even with all of these variables around us.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think in a lot of these markets, kind of searching for a little bit of direction, and I think particularly there was a bit of a reset in a lot of these markets, or post USDA, of course, which also collided with this shift in weather as we got into that late June and so forth. And so I think here in the case of corn, it's been a bit directionless. Maybe we push through some support here, and again, momentum could swing us a little bit lower. But at that point, you wonder if we just start getting a little bit too cheap. Maybe I think that's possible. But again, a lot of weather ahead of us, a lot of uncertainty on yield again, both in the U.S. and in Canada. So just a lot of moving parts here that have to get figured out. And again, you can sort of lean, you can sort of handicap it, but I think it'll be a little while till we have a great sense of what what that number will be for yield for, quite frankly, any of these crops we're watching.
Yeah, well, we were at these levels in Deese corn going back to mid-May, and then we shot to about 625, and then went straight down again. So it's been difficult.
It's been difficult, along the way, and we tried to indicate to our readers too. It's during these stretches, it's just been an incredibly dangerous market for both bulls and bears. It's easy to overshoot to the upside. It's easy to overshoot to the downside. I think sort of the adage in weather markets often, don't chase the rallies, don't sell the breaks, and in some ways that's maybe the case here again. But this has been pretty violent here over a short window of time. There's no question about that. It's the pendulum has been swinging maybe a little bit too far in both directions.
Yeah, and yesterday when I was having a conversation with the farmer from Iowa, I believe that he was around Arlington. He talked about how on that soybean acreage number, he's like, when I look out my window, that's not what I see. And so I think that's one of the interesting things here through the season. Does that soybean acre number hold up? Is that what we actually have? And hey, listen, the math maybe at this point, and they just don't pick the number out of the air and sort of say, what do we want it to be? There is some math involved here, so you got to put some weight in that. But there's good reason to also be doubtful that maybe there's a revision. We're gonna have to really. That's one of the variables that I think everybody's watching very, very closely here as we get through the season.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, Sean, and I agree. And again, up here in Canada, we like to maybe hack away on stats cans sometimes too. And within all of that, I appreciate your point about the fact that like there is process, and I think there's a genuine effort to get the right numbers. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's a conspiracy or anything like that. They have a process. I think it's rigorous. I think it's disciplined. But that doesn't mean that they got it right per se, so that does lend itself to maybe some revisions, especially when you get a big miss per se, like we had in this report here at the end of June, relative to expectations. What are we subject to a revision there as well? Never mind the usual uncertainty around yield at this time of year. So certainly far from settled by any stretch, on the supply side.
John, I have a process. I have a very good process. I have a lot of research. I have a lot of thinking, some math on my sports gambling, and I'm never right.
No, that's true. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of really smart people spend a lot of time combing through the details, and it's difficult. It's obviously, if it was easy, it's not easy.
Yeah, there is anything else in that WASDE that we should hit on, or does that cover it?
No, I think that's the main thing. I think at least in the moment anyway, again, the market is focusing rightfully on the supply side. As we look further out, one of the things we think about in the back of our mind is what does demand look like? And that's a whole conversation on its own. For example, Chinese imports for soybeans nudged down 1 million tons. Okay, that's kind of within the margin of error, so it isn't exactly game-changing news. But does that hint at a little bit of softer Chinese demand going forward? That's something we've been a little cautious about. Something like world wheat, I think that's pretty tight in terms of its carryout. So those are sort of bigger, slower moving things that we have our eyes on. So nothing I think in the WASDE that was overly notable for those markets per se, but just a couple of things we're keeping an eye on as well. But again, at least for now, rightfully the fixation is on weather and yield and how do the supply parts come together here in the U.S.